मेंबर्स ने एक सेटिस्फैक्शन एक्सप्रेस की कि जिस प्रकार से रेवेन्यू ग्रोथ हो रहा है उसके संबंध में इस साल उसको और एक्सपैंड करने की आवश्यकता है, क्योंकि 1 अप्रैल के बाद से जो 2015-16 का बेस ईयर है उसके ऊपर एक फर्दर पिछले साल की तुलना में 14% का इंक्रीज जाएगा. There will be a further 14% increase as far as the SGST is concerned. And therefore the protected revenue of the states, because of this 14% increase itself, will also increase. The second, which was a very important item on the agenda, was the change in the ownership structure of the GSTN. The original structure of GSTN was that 49% was held by the government, that is 24.5 by the central government and 24.5 by the state government, and the balance 51% was held by some other entities. I had made a suggestion a few weeks ago that this amount should be, that this shareholding of 51% should be taken over purchased by the government and divided equally between the states and the center. The council discussed this proposal at length. There was a very detailed discussion on this item, and it was agreed that the 51% held by these private entities should be taken over by the government, and eventually the center government should hold 50%, and the state governments will hold 50% collectively. The collective share of the state governments will be pro rata divided amongst the states in accordance with their GST ratios. While doing so, the council also recommended that the GSTN will continue to employ people contractually and have the flexibility to get the best talent on the best terms from the market, considering the wide range of activities of and the width of the activities and the responsibility of the GSTN itself. The next important item on the agenda was with regard to an incentive on digitized payments. The issue before the council was whether on digital payments through either the banking mode or the check mode or any form of digitized mode, a 2% incentive should be given to those who pay entirely in the digitized mode. This would be subject to a cap of ₹100 per voucher, and this would not apply to the composition dealers. There was a very detailed discussion held on this point. The majority was in favor of this suggestion. There was two alternative views. One did not favor this, and the second view was to accept this, but to have a list of negative items on which this incentive would not be available. And therefore, the council, after a detailed discussion, decided that a committee of 5 members, that is 5 ministers of the state, be constituted, which would expeditiously consider all the viewpoints being the majority viewpoint in favor of incentive on digitized payment, the concerns expressed by those, even though in a minority, who did not agree with this, and the third, whether there is a desirability of having a negative list on which this incentive would not apply. So that committee in the next 2 days would be constituted, and that would take into consideration all these viewpoints, and its recommendations would come up before the council in the next meeting for consideration. The next item before the agenda was the imposition of a cess on sugar, particularly considering that the cost of sugar has risen beyond rupees 35 per kilogram, and the market price is between 26 to 28 per kilogram. And the sugarcane farmers are in deep distress. And therefore, can we impose some kind of a cess? Now, since this is after the GST has been constituted, this is the first such suggestion which has come up. How are such contingencies to be addressed in a GST regime? Are they to be addressed by imposition of a cess, or are they to be addressed by temporarily increasing a tax, or by some alternative method of revenue raising? These viewpoints were extensively discussed and debated in the council, and it was agreed that keeping all the views which have come up before the council, a separate group of 5 ministers within the next 2 weeks, because of the urgency of this matter, would make a recommendation to the council as to what are the avenues of raising revenue to meet contingencies of this kind, where the cost of a commodity is much higher than its selling price, and therefore the farmer is in distress, and which are the cases in which this can be made applicable on a matter of principle itself. So this recommendation, this committee would be announced over the next 2 days, and this recommendation should be coming to us quite soon. And the last item on the agenda was the alternative return filing mechanism, which needed to be simplified. And if you recollect, there had been a discussion over the last several months over one methodology that Mr. Nandan Nilikani had suggested. There was another system which had been suggested by the officials, particularly in the state governments, and the two needed to be reconciled. And a group was working under Mr. Sushil Modi, which had several rounds of meeting with all the experts. They traveled all over, and finally they were able to find a reconciliation. And that reconciliation has been found. Dr. Adia would just explain the new model of return filing to you. And this return filing process, because the preparation of the new alternative returns and its implementations, the software necessary for this, would take about 6 months. That has been approved by the council today, and within a period of 6 months that would be now made applicable itself. I'll request Dr. Adia to explain this last item to you.
So I'll briefly explain the new return design. It will take about 6 months for GSTN to prepare the software for it. So for the period of next 6 months, the current arrangement of 3B and GSTR1 will continue. So that is the first thing. That is the first phase of transition. So for the next 6 months, GSTR3B and GSTR1 filing will continue. In the second phase, then we will move on. But before that, let me explain to you what the return will look like. After 6 months, what is the new system of return that will be there? There will be a single monthly return for everybody, except composition dealers and except people who have got zero transaction during the trimester. Now those people will be allowed to file quarterly return. If you do not have any transaction, and today also we find that out of returns which are filed, about 30% transaction, 30% returns are nil returns. There are no transactions which are reported. So those people will get the benefit of filing a return once in a quarter, and composition dealers are already having that facility of filing a return once in quarter only. But other than these two category of people, the remaining people will all file one single return per month. And that return will contain the details. In case of B2C, it will contain the details of total turnover, and in case of B2B, it will have to have the details of all the sales invoices which are there with that dealer. Whatever sales he has made, in case of B2B, he will have to put invoice-wise detail along with 4-digit HSN code. Now this is what it will have to have. In the transition phase, that is after 6 months, even after the return is prepared, the return design itself will have one separate column in which the dealer will be able to claim provisional credit based on his own calculation. Now this will continue for a period of 6 months. The second phase of transition will continue for a period of 6 months, which means that for 6 months we will allow provisional credit to be taken by the dealer irrespective of whether the seller from whom he has bought the goods has uploaded the invoice or not. Irrespective of that, we will allow him the provisional credit to be taken for a period of 6 months. But during this 6 months, the GSTN will continuously feed information to that dealer about what is the gap between what he is claiming as provisional credit and what he is supposed to get as per the invoices which are uploaded by his sellers. So that gap percentage will be known to him, and he will try to bring this gap down over a period of 6 months. In the first month, he may find that the gap is 30%, but he will call up his seller and say, why are you not filing my return? Why are you not filing my invoice? And the seller can then upload invoice, and then again the gap will come down. So that way we will try to bring down this gap between the provisional credit claimed and the credit which is otherwise admissible as per the seller's information. And after 6 months, once we find that the rate is reducing, the gap is coming down, we will switch over to the actual implementation of the GSTR new return system, in which all B2B sellers, B2B people will have to put details of all their sales invoices, and the only way to get input tax credit will be if your seller has uploaded the invoices online. So that is the only way to get input tax credit. So that means that there will be no further return procedure to be filed. As long as every seller has put all the invoices online, the return for everybody will be generated automatically by the computer. Based on your own sales details, the output tax liability will be determined by GSTN and auto-filled in your GSTR return. And based on the sellers who have uploaded the invoices, the input tax credit will be auto-populated by the computer. So it will become a completely automatic system of return filing in which there will be absolutely no hassle. But having said that, we are saying that the only way to get input tax credit is if your sellers have uploaded the invoice. If they have not uploaded the invoice, then you will not get the credit. But that is in the third phase. So the first phase of 6 months for preparation of software, the second phase of getting provisional credit for a period of 6 months, and the third phase will be when no credit will be admissible unless the seller has uploaded the invoice. Having said that, let me also say that that does not mean that if the seller uploads the invoice, it is a right of buyer to get credit. If the seller, after having uploaded invoice, does not pay the tax to government, the government will still retain the right to, first of all, go after the seller. We will try to recover it from the seller. But if the seller is not able to pay for whatever reason, suppose he runs away or he is a bogus party, then the recovery, the government will retain the right of recovering it from buyer also, but through a due process of law, by giving a automatic notice through the online process, and then by allowing him the opportunity to be heard, and then the government can still recover that from the buyer. So this will become a simple system of filing return. There will be unique directional flow of invoices. Earlier system had cross movement of invoices. So earlier system said that the seller will upload invoices, then the buyer will see what are the missing invoices, the buyer will then upload the missing invoices, and then the computer will match, and then accordingly the input tax credit will be granted. All this is going away, and there will be only single return with details of all the sales invoices to be filed by everybody. Nobody needs to put any purchase side invoice at all. Now this in short is the system.
हमारे YouTube चैनल दैनिक विजय न्यूज़ को सब्सक्राइब करें, साथ ही बेल आइकन को प्रेस करें ताकि हमारे सभी अपडेट